How you doing? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf. What Daf? I think Daf Zayin. Right? Why not? I think so. Yeah, why not? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, why not? Daf Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I think Daf Zayin. Why not Daf Zayin? One second. On Wednesday, before I left Eretz Yisrael, we did Daf Beis. Thursday, I didn't record. Friday, I did 3, which would be Gimel Dalet Hey. And then, what's today? Monday? Yesterday was Vav. Wait, did I not? Oh no, Gimel Dalet, and then yesterday was Hey. Today was Vav. Yeah, okay. I think we're up to Zayin. Wow, today I went to the DMV. Ooh, sheesh. DMV does not disappoint. DMV has the the reputation, the sort of stereotype, whatever, of like just being the pits, just like straight up bureaucratic nonsense. And Itaka went to the DMV, I think like a decade ago, and it was actually very efficient. I thought maybe they got their act together. Ooh. Well, maybe they what's it called when you go back again? They relapsed or something, but that was rough. Poshet stood in line for an hour and a half just to then be able to stand on another line. The DMV does not disappoint. I'm exhausted now. Hopefully I won't be too tired to record Babylon Talmud. Sheesh. And also I'm feeling more jet lagged this time around than I usually do. Wonder if maybe because it was a day flight. I don't know. Anyways, all right. We're gonna start on Daf Vav Amud Beis. Daf Vav Amud Beis, about 4 lines before it starts getting wide. About 10 lines or so from the bottom of Vav Amud Beis at the 2 dots. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Nefrayin Men V'chulei. So the Tanakame had said that that we don't pay the Ivdei Kochavim within 3 days of the Yom Tif, and we don't receive payment from them. Rabbi Yehuda says we can receive payment from them because it's negative for them, so that's okay. But the Chacham responded and say, even though it's negative for them now, but tomorrow it will be positive for them. They got it out of the way, they're done with it, and I think that was the pshat. And then they will give a satov shavach v'odaya to their getchke. So now, does Rabbi Yehuda not hold of, to not agree with this notion of, wow, my brain isn't working. I don't even know the word I'm thinking of, but like this concept of, I feel like the concept isn't the right word, but anyways, this logic of, well, yeah, maybe it's negative in the short term, but in the long term, it's positive. However, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with that, line of reasoning. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of that concept of sort of, even though maybe short term it's negative for them, but long term it ends up being positive for them. But actually, within the Brisa, that Rabbi Yehuda himself does deploy this logic. Says Rabbi Yehuda that a woman should not use some kind of I think it's like some kind of like face product, some kind of face like treatment. I think that in the short term, the face does not look good, but in the long term, it looks givaldi. So says Rabbi Yehuda, Isha loy tasud b'moed mipnei shnei v'lula. So a woman should not, do this treatment during Chol HaMoed, because then on Chol HaMoed, she's not gonna look good, right? She's gonna be in the middle of this treatment, which during the treatment, it doesn't look good. But even though, but afterwards her face will look gewaltig. But Rabbi Yehuda does agree, though, that what she can do is besit shechol lekaploi b'moed shetofat b'moed af b'shim tzera achshav smechi la'achar zman. But Rabbi Yehuda says, however, if let's say we're talking about Chol HaMoed Sukkos, let's say, okay, and Chol HaMoed Sukkos is be'etzem 6 days, and let's say day 1 of Chol HaMoed Sukkos is a Sunday. So mamish, if she's going to do this treatment on Sunday, by the end of the week, by the end of Chol HaMoed, regardless of what day of the week it starts, but whatever. Anyways, by the end of Chol HaMoed, already, the results of the treatment will be coming through. So if that's the case, that already, sure, during Chol HaMoed she's going to be mid-treatment, but also on Chol HaMoed she's going to be post-treatment, where she's going to look amazing. So then it's okay, because even though in the short term she is, she's mid-treatment, and that doesn't look good, but also on Chol HaMoed she will be post-treatment by the end of Chol HaMoed, and even though in the short term it's, let's say, negative, in the long term, also on Chol HaMoed, it's positive, so therefore that's okay. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda does have this concept of, even though in the short term, it's negative, however, what's important is that in the long term it's positive, and so long as, the long-term result will be felt on Chol HaMoed, that's okay. So why is Rabbi Yehuda not deploying that same logic in our Mishnah? Davka the Chachamim are using that logic against his opinion. Whatever he's saying, right? That you can get paid back by the Ovid Chachamim, even though in the long term it's going to be good for him. He's not employing the logic of the kind of long term implications. Omer of Nachman by Yitzchok, says Nachman by Yitzchok, Hanoch le Hilchis Moyed, Techulu Meitzer Achshav, V'Samechu Lachar Zmaninu. The thing is, Rabbi Yehuda said that in the context, right, the face treatment, in the context of Chol HaMoyed. The thing is, Bechlal on Chol HaMoyed, all of the melachas that are allowed on Chol HaMoed are things that are Meitzer Achshav and Sameach Lachar Zman. Right, I think Rashi gives some examples. Right, for example, shchita. Right. So Chol HaMoed, you're going to slaughter an animal and get all bloody and gutty and all that stuff. That's not so fun, I guess. It wouldn't be fun for me, at least not currently. But Sameach Lachar Zman. But afterwards, Givaldi, you're going to have Simchas Yom Tov. You're going to be able to eat like a sheep or whatever. What is Tikkun Suda, right? All sorts of things that you're going to do on Melacha, that you're going to do on Yom Tov, the Tzorech HaMoyed, are going to be things that even though right now they're not fun, but ultimately it's you can have Simchas Yom Tov. So therefore, because all of the things that are permitted on Chol HaMoed are things that would be considered Meitzer Achshav V'Sameach Lachar Zman, so in the context of Chol HaMoed, so then this facial treatment is just another example of that. But outside of Chol HaMoed, Rabbi Yehuda would not, employ this logic. Ravina Amar says, Ravina Ovid Kochavlin in Peiron La'olam Meitzer. Ravina explains Rabbi Yehuda that in Rabbi Yehuda's view, in the eyes of an Ovid Kochavim, paying back is always a tough thing, and therefore the concept of sort of long-term happiness doesn't apply to Ovid Kochavim paying back. Says the Gemara, that our Mishnah is unlike Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. The Tanya Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha Omer milve b'shtar ein nifrayin mehen, that we cannot be paid back if it's a milve b'shtar, if it's a loan that had a document, that the yid has a document on for the loan. Milve al peh nifrayin mehen mipnei shu kamatzam yodim. However, if it's a milve al peh, right, if the yid had lent the Ovei Kochavim money, and there was no document, well then, says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, the yid can be paid back, right, the yid can be paid back, so because since there's no document, if he's able to be paid back, just let him get paid back. He says, Kematzul miyodim. It's like you're like saving the money because, otherwise there's question, you might not get paid back. There's no documentation. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha makes a distinction between if it's a milva al b'shtar or milva al peh. This is unlike the Tanakam, unlike our Mishnah, which does not make such a distinction. Okay. Excuse me. Oh, what's that? Bow. Woo, sheesh. Rabbi Yisrael, how you doing there? Okay. Where are we? Yosef of Yosef achoyder of Abba v'Yosef of Abba kameder of Huna. Rav Yosef was sitting behind Reb Abba, and Reb Abba was sitting before Rav Huna. I guess it's like, I don't know, in my mind, it's like, we learned at the end of Bava Kama how the Beis HaMedrash was set up with the different rows, maybe, so maybe, Rav Huna was giving a shir, and Reb Abba was, let's say, in the front row, Rav Yosef was behind Reb Abba. V'Yosef HaKamen, Rav Huna was saying, Hilchzak Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha v'Hilchzak Rabbi Yehuda, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, and also like Rabbi Yehuda. Hilchasa Rabbi Yehoshua Adam Morin, when Rav Huna said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, i.e. regarding this halacha of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, that a yid can be paid back from an Ovei Kochavim even within the 3 days of the Yom Tiv, if it's a milveh al peh, because it's kamatzal miyodum. So it says Rav Huna we paskin that way. Rabbi Yehuda, and when Rav Huna is saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, it's in the context of the Tanakh that we learned in the Mishnah. Hanoi saying tzemer latzabo, the tzboya la adam v'tzavo shacher v'tzavo adam. If somebody gives a wool to a dyer to dye the wool, if he says, would you dye me the wool red, but he does it black, or would you dye me the wool black, but he does it red. Reb Meir Omer nosin lo dmei tzmaro. So Reb Meir says that the dyer is koneh the wool with a shinoi maise. He changed the wool. It was plain wool, now it's black wool or red wool. So by doing so, he was koneh the wool. And the dyer, so meaning the client, let's call them Reuven and Shimon. So who should be the dyer and who should be the, maybe let's say Reuven is the dyer. So Shimon gives this wool to Reb Reuven to dye. And he's supposed to dye it, let's say, black, and he dyed it red. So Reuven, the dyer, did not do what he was meant to do. Shimon says, hey, can you dye it, I don't remember what I said, black? And he dyed it red, so he didn't do what he was supposed to do. So says Reb Meir, well, Reuven, the dyer, is koneh the wool by shinui maise, and he pays Shimon back the value of the wool that he was given, right? Shimon had given him wool to dye black. He messed up, he dyed it red. So Reuven returns to Shimon the value of the wool that was given to him. So Meir Omer Nosno Dmei Tzmaro. So it says Meir that Reuven the dyer gives to Shimon the value of the wool that he received to dye. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, Ima shvach yosur ala yitzir nosa yitzir v'ma yitzir yosur ala shvach nosa shvach. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is actually that Shimon, the client, still needs to pay Ruvain for his work. Shimon had given Ruvain wool to dye. He was supposed to dye it black. He messed up. He dyed it red. Shimon still needs to pay Ruvain, but he pays the lesser amount. Lesser of what? Well, there's two possible amounts. One is the increased value of the wool. Before it was just plain wool. Now it's dyed wool. The other amount is just pashut, the amount of money that it cost Ruvain to dye it, right? Meaning Shimon gives Ruvain a piece of wool. Ruvain then takes out different dyes and things that he has, and he then takes the wool and he dyes the wool. So that costs Ruvain something. That's an expensive for Ruvain. So if the increased value of the wool is greater than that of the cost to dye it, so what Shimon needs to pay Ruvain for his work is just the cost, is the lower amount. And also vice versa. If the cost to dye it was more expensive than the current value of the wool post dyeing the wrong color, so Shimon would pay Ruvain that amount, the lower amount. And I reckon would then get the dyed wool. Okay, so again, Rabbi Yehuda says, if the increased value to the wool is greater than the expense, than Ruvain's expense, so then Shimon has to pay Ruvain the expense. If the expense is greater than the increased value, so Shimon has to pay Ruvain the increased value, which is the lower amount. Adrinu Rav Yosef Laipe. Rav Yosef then says to Rav Abba, Bishlam malacha k'Rabbi ben Korcha itztich sagadate chaminu yochid v'ab malacha krabim kamash malacha kiyochid. Says Rav Yosef to Rav Abba, he says, look, I understand why Rav Huna had to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, that when it's a milva al peh, you can get paid back even within these 3 days before the Yom Tov. I understand why Rav Huna had to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha there, because otherwise I would say Yochid v'Rab Malacha Krab, that we should pass at the Chachamim that even a milva al peh cannot be repaid to a yid in those 3 days. So I might think, I would assume Yochid v'Rab Malacha Krab that we're not going to pass like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, we're going to pass like the Chachamim, like we always do. So I understand why Rav Huna had to say, actually, in this case, we do paskin like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. So again, Rav Yosef Laipe b'shlama halacha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. I understand why Rav Huna had to tell us that the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha itztrich, because otherwise I would have thought Yochid Rab Malacha Kirabim. That machlok is Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha and the Chachamim. Of course, we're passing at the Chachamim wow, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like the consensus opinion, individual versus like the opinion of the many. Therefore, if we had to teach us that no, we taka paskin like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, like the individual opinion. But why did Rav Huna have to teach that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Of course, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that instead of Ruvain paying back Shimon the value of the wool, Shimon pays Ruvain the lesser of the amount of either the shvach or the hotzah or the yitzir. Pshita. The machlokes v'achakach stam, hilchos stam. Of course, we pass like Rabbi Yehuda because we have a concept that when there's a machlokes, like in this case, machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, but then afterwards there's a stam mishnah like one of the opinions, and in this case we have a stam mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda, as we're going to see in a second. So when you have a machlokes, but then you have a stam like one of the opinions, it means that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that the halacha follows that opinion, the stam opinion. So of course we pass like Rabbi Yehuda. Why did Rav Huna have to say that? Again, pshita, it's obvious, the machloikes v'chakach stam, ilchsa kistam. That when you have machloikes followed by a stam, so we paskin like that opinion, like the opinion that was mentioned plainly afterwards. Machloikes b'bav kama v'stam b'bav mitzia. Interesting that the Gemara Davka calls Bava Kama and Bava Mitzia by name. I feel like I don't think we usually see the Gemara like reference like Kedushin. Like, oh, in Masechta Kedushin or Masechta Yavamis. Or interesting that the Torah explicitly mentions Bava Kama, Bava Mitzia. This Machlaikes that we just saw between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, that's in Bava Kama. And in Bava Mitzia, we paskin, we have a Stam Mishnah, an unattributed Mishnah, like the opinion of Reb Yehuda. The Tanan called Mishana Yoda Tachtona. That the Mishnah in Bava Mitzia says that anybody who changes is in the weaker position. For example, here, the dyer, instead of dyeing black like he was supposed to, he dyed red, or vice versa. So since he changed what he was supposed to do, he deviated what he was supposed to do, so he has the lower hand, like Reb Yehuda says. Right? Whether it's the expense, whether it's the increased value, whatever is lower. Okay, and whoever changes his mind has the weaker position. That already is related to the Mishnah in Bava Mitzia by Asar Ches Humanin. But we see in that Mishnah called Mashana Yodel Tachtona, that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and it's unattributed, which means that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. That's what it's saying. So why did Rav Huna need to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Of course the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. It's stam b'achaka, it's machlokes v'achakach stam. Rav Huna mishum de ein seder the Mishnah. Rav Huna says, yeah, but there's no order to the Mishnayos. And therefore, who says it's machlokes v'achakach stam? Maybe it's a stam v'achakach machlokes. So Rav Huna says that there's no order to the Mishnayos, and therefore he had to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Huna mishum de'ein seder the Mishnah dikala. Maybe you could say sosam tana b'reisha v'achakach machlokes, because you could argue that since there's no order in the Mishnayos, actually first there was the Stam Mishnah, but then afterwards it turns out that it was a machlokes. So therefore, Rav Huna had to tell us that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Yochi kol machlokes v'achakach stam le'mein seder le'mishnah. But if that's the case, I don't understand. If we're saying that there's no order in the Mishnayos, then this whole concept of machlokes v'achakach stam is irrelevant. Because the whole concept of the machlokes v'achakach stam is that, well, we have machlokes, in this case of Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, but then we see a stam mishnah like one of them, it must be that in the end we paskin like one of the opinions. But if we're saying that there is no order in the Mishnayos, well then, how can you ever have this concept of machlokes v'achakach stam? That assumes that the machlokes happens before the stam mishnah. But if there's no order, then maybe it was the stam mishnah first, followed by a machlokes. So Rav Huna ki lo yamrinon ein seder b'chad mesechta, b'shem mesechta amrinon. Okay, that's a double negative, but basically, if we positivize it, so then what it means is that in one, if it's all in the same Masechta, so then we can assume that there's an order within the same Masechta. So if, in one Mishnah, there's a Machlokes, and in the next Mishnah, there's a Stam Mishnah, like one of the opinions, let's say, so within the same Masechta, so you could say that there's order. But between Masechtas, no. And our Mishnah, the Machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, the Machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda is in Bava Kama, whereas the Stam Mishnah is a different Masechta, it's in Bava Mitzia. So therefore, it's not Machlokes v'achakach Stam, because it's different Mishnayos, we can't assume the order. It's different Masechtas, therefore we can't assume the order, and therefore Rav Huna had to tell us that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Yosef kulin nezikin chadam Masechta. But Rav Yosef, and we've seen this before, I think in Bava Kama, I have to look it up. But Rav Yosef holds that all of Nezikin, Bava Kama, Bava Mitzia, Bava Basra, it's all one big Masechta that's divided in three, and therefore Bava Kama and Bava Metzia really are the same Masechta, and therefore a Machlokes in Bava Kama followed by a Stam Mishnah in Bava Metzia would mean that the halacha is like the opinion in this case of Reb Yehuda. That was why Rav Yosef said, I don't understand why Rav Huna needed to tell us that the halacha is like Reb Yehuda. Alternatively, Mishum de Katoni la Gabe Ilchis of Psikta Chol Mishana Yod al Tachtona v'Chol Chozebo Yod al Tachtona. Alternatively, you could say, regardless of the order of Mishnayos and Machlokes v'Chakach Stam, regardless, this Mishnah of Kol Mishana Yod al Tachtona doesn't seem to make sense where it is so much. That is in a Mishnah, the first Mishnah in the Perek Asoicher Sa'umonin, and it's talking about somebody who hires workers, and then somebody reneges. So whoever reneges as the lower, right, as is in the less favorable negotiating position, and in that context, we then add this Kol Mashana Yod al Tachtona. Anybody who changes Yod al Tachtona, which references this machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir when it comes to dyeing red and wool, why is it there? Why is it there by Sochas Umanin? It's out of context and stamified to teach us that the halacha is like that stam, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Tanu Rabbanon, the Rebbe is taught, Lo Yomar Odom L'Chaver Anire, Lo Yomar Odom L'Chaver. A person should not say to his friend, Hanir Shetamid Mila Erev. No, do you want to come over? Do you want to, right, where am I? Lo Yomar Odom L'Chaver, meaning a person shouldn't say to his friend on Shabbos, do you want to come over on Motzoi Shabbos and do some work at my house? Again, Tanu Rabbanon, Lo Yomar Odom L'Chaver, a person should not say to his friend, Hanir Shetamid Imi Lo Erev, do you want to come over on Motzei Shabbos and do some work for me? Rav Shimon Koch Omer Odom L'Chaver Hanir Shetamid Imi Lo Erev. Whereas Rav Shimon Koch disagrees and says, a person can say to his friend, hey, why don't you come over on Motzei Shabbos and do some work for me? Amar Rabba Bachano, Amar B'Yochanan Halacha Ilchso Rav Shimon Koch, and says Rabba Bachano, then Rabbi Yochanan that the halacha is Takeh like Yeshua ben Korcho. Tanaban Anishal Lechacham V'Timei Lo Yishal Lechacham V'Yitar. Says the rabbis taught, if a person asked the halachic shaila to one poisik and his answer was tamei, he shouldn't go to another poisik to see maybe he'll say that it's tahor. No, you shouldn't do that. If the poisik that he went to says tamei, so it's tamei. Similarly, if a person goes to one poisek and he says osir, he shouldn't then go fish around for another poisek who will say mutter. What if there were two poiskim next to each other? One says tami, one says tar. What do? One of them says that osir, the other one says mutter. Well, if one of the poiskim was known to be a greater poisik, he's wiser, I don't know, gadol minin is like a funny thing to express, but he's a more well regarded poisik. So if you have two poskim standing next to each other and you ask a shaila, one says mutter, one says asur, if one of them is kind of recognized to be the greater scholar, so listen to his opinion. But if they're both, kind of similar, so machmir, follow the more stringent opinion. Rabbi Shimon Korcha Omer b'shel teira alichachar machmir. Says Rabbi Shimon Korcha, look, if we're talking about a shaila midah iraise, so then follow the more stringent opinion b'shel soifrim. But if it's a derabanan shaila alichachar mekel, you could follow the more lenient opinion. Omer Rabbi Shimon Korcha halacha Rabbi Omer Rabbi Yosef halacha Rabbi Shimon Korcha. Says Rabbi Yosef that the halacha is takeh like Rabbi Shimon Korcha. Okay, fine. Amar Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have a chulan shechazu boid in mekablin oisan or lamis. the rabbis taught that it says Rashi, a gazlun or an amoretz, even if they do tshuva, we don't accept it. A gazlun and amoretz, if they do tshuva, we don't accept it. Right, we don't accept it. Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says Rabbi Yehuda chazubayin bit matmonius in mekabel nosim b'fayis mekabel nosim. Look, if their tshuva that they did was in secret, well then we don't accept the tshuva. But if it was b'far hesya, if it was out in public, they publicly stated that they are interested in doing tshuva, so then we can accept them. Those they also divreim b'matmonius mekabel nosim. Alternatively, if the sins that they did as a gazlan or as an amaretz were in private, okay, so since they only sinned in private, we can accept their tshuva. However, b'far hesya, if they sinned in public, we don't accept them. Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha say Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha bein kach uvein kach, regardless of if they did their averis privately or publicly, mikablen, we do accept them. We do accept them in their tshuva. Shenemar shuvu banim shoivavim, that my shoivavim children, my nudnik children, should do tshuva. So we see even shovavim can do tshuva, and therefore we accept them. Amar b'Yitzchak ish kfar Akko, Amar b'Yechon elchzak koisoi azug, and says of Yitzchak ish kfar Akko, and the name of Yochanan, that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, that even right that no matter either way, even if they did the averis b'far hesya, we could still accept their tshuva. So now we get up to another Mishnah, a Mishnah that I believe we saw yesterday, maybe the day before, but I think yesterday. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel says Rabbi Shmuel shloisha lifneim v'shloisha lachareim also. Says Rabbi Shmuel, not just the 3 days preceding the Yom Tov, but also the 3 days post-seeding the Yom Tov are also asur. The Chacham say lifnei dein asur, lacharei dein muter. The Chacham say that the 3 days before, well, importantly, kind of, they don't say 3 days. The Chacham say before the Yom Tov is what's asur, but after the Yom Tov is muter. Says the Gemara, Amar of Tachliva ba'avdimi, Amar Shmuel, Yom Echad l'divrei Rabbi Shmuel la'olam asur. We saw this, was it yesterday? What was this? Beis. Le'el, Vav Muralef. Yeah, that's yesterday. That says of Tachliva ba'avdimi, that according to Rabbi Shmuel, because I guess the Christians have a Yom Tov every single Sunday, so Memela the Gans Vach, the whole week, you're not allowed to do business with Dordei Kochavim, because every Sunday is a Yom Tov for them, and the 3 days beforehand are Asur, Shabbos, Friday, Thursday, as well as the 3 days afterwards, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So therefore, Memela, in practice, according to Bishmal, you can never do business with Ovdei Kochavim in practice. The Chacham said that before the Yom Tov is what's asur, but after the Yom Tov is muter. Chacham Hainu Tanakama. But aren't the Chacham saying the same thing as the Tanakama? Tanakama said 3 days before the Yom Tov are asur, 3 days afterwards are fine, and the Chacham here are saying that it's before the Yom Tov that's asur, but after the Yom Tov is muter. So aren't the Chacham and the Tanakam saying the same thing? Hein b'lo yedei nika benayu. Well, one nafkamina is, right, we're going to see different versions of what the, different opinions of what the nafkamina is, but first we say what the nafkamina is, that hein b'lo yedei. Right, we saw yesterday, machlekes, a shaila of, does the, right, when we say 3 days, does it include the Yom Tiv or not. So we had said yesterday that it excludes the Yom Tiv, but Tanakama Sover Ein Beloy Edain. So as we said yesterday, that when the Mishnah says 3 days before the Yom Tiv, it's separate from the Yom Tiv itself. Whereas we'll say that the rabbis in our Mishnah who say Lifnei Edain also Lachar Edain Mutter, so that is including the Yom Tiv itself. Alternatively, Nosav Nosanika Benayu, the nafkamina is, if you did do business, is the money osabano? Tanakama says Nosav Nosan Mutter. Tanakama says that if he did do business, it's mutter bano. But when Basroi Savi Nosav Nosan Osir, whereas the rabbis in our Mishnah would be more stringent, right? They're more blunt. They don't make as many discrepancies. They would say that if you do business before the Yom Tiv, the profits are asurin. According to the Chacham in our Mishnah. The Shmuel is Shmuel's opinion, Shmuel, Ba'goyla ein osur ela yoim edom, that Shmuel says that in the Galus outside of Eretz Yisrael, only the Yom Tov itself is osur, but the other days are mutter. Tanakama Islay de Shmuel. Tanakama holds like Shmuel, Rabbanan Basroi leis lehu de Shmuel. Whereas the rabbis in our Mishnah are more blunt. They would say that the restrictions apply even Bagola. The difference between them is Nocham Amadi, the Tani Nocham Amadi Omer, Eino Osur Ela Yom Echad Lifnei Edain. Nocham Amadi says that only one day prior to the Yom Tif is also Tanakama, Leis Leid Nocham Amadi. Tanakama, of course, does not hold like Nocham Amadi because Tanakama says 3 days, not 1 day. Rabbanan Basroi, Islu Nocham Amadi, whereas the rabbis in our Mishnah don't give a particular amount. They just say Lifnei Edain Osur, Lachar Edain Mutter. They don't say how many days Lifnei. So the Tanakama in our Mishnah is like Nocham Amadi, that it's taka 1 day before the Yom Tov. Zokte Gemore Gufa, we said earlier, Nocham Amadi, Omer says Nocham Amadi Eino Osur Ela Yoim Echad Lifnei Edain. Nocham Amadi says that only the day before the Yom Tov is Osur. Amlu, they say to Nocham Amadi, Nishtakei Adover V'lo Ne'emar, or maybe V'lo Nomar. Lo Nomar or Lo Nemar? Maybe Lo Nomar. What does it say? V'lo Nemar. That let's just let this matter drop and let it not be said. How could we just let it drop? There's the rabbis in our Mishnah who agree with this opinion that it's just 1 day before the Yom Tov. Man Chacham Nocham Amadi. No, who are the Chacham in our Mishnah? Taka Nocham Amadi, and we're saying let that opinion drop. Let's not hold on to it. Tanidach, another brayse says Nocham Amadi. Omer says Nocham Amadi. Moichrin loim sus zocher zokin b'milchama. You could sell to the Ovdei Kochavim an old male horse during a war that won't help them at all. That would be, you'd be allowed to sell them that because it wouldn't be helpful for them. Amrulo. They said to Nocham Amadi, let's just leave that here and let it not be said. But Ben Beseira agrees with Nocham Amadi, the Tanan Ben Beseira Mati Besus, that Ben Beseira allows them to sell a horse to the of the Chavim Ben Beseira, Lemaflik Ben Zcham Nenekevis. Yeah, but Ben Beseira is not the opinion of Nocham Amadi, because Nocham Amadi, he distinguishes between, right, he says Zocher, between Zocher and Nekeva, between, right, Zokein, right, whether it's old, whether it's young. Rabbi Yehuda Ben Beseira doesn't make such distinctions. Yomi the Komaflik Ben Zcham Nenekevis K'Rabbanan Svirelei. So Nachum Amadi holds like the Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan would say, let's just drop this and leave it. So it's not like Rabbi Yehuda Ben Beseira's opinion. Tanidach Nachum Amadi, Omer says Nachum Amadi, Asheves. Sheves is dill. Misaser Zerav Yerek Vizirin can be tithed whether in its seed form, in its vegetables form, or shoot form. Although they said to let this concept drop and let it not be said. But doesn't Rabbi Eliezer agree with Nachum Hamadi? The Tan Rabbi Eliezer Omer Asheves Misaser Zer V'Erek V'Zirin. That Rabbi Eliezer says that dill can be tied in seed form, in vegetable form, and in shoot form. Also, the Gnunisa, Rabbi Eliezer is specifically talking about in a garden, whereas Nachum Hamadi is talking about even in a field. Yomi the Abai says Abai Gavaraba also may asin Komilsa the Omar Amri Lay Nishtakei Adov V'Lonemer. There was a great man who came from, I guess, our place, and everything that he said, they would tell him, let's just forget about that opinion. Omar Ika Chad of Din Kavase. To which Abai responded, well, there is one thing that we do like Nachum Hamadi, the Tanya that we learn in the Brest, Nachum Hamadi, Omer Shoyel Adam Tzochem B'Shemei Tefillah. Nachum Hamadi says that a person can pray for whatever he wants, for his needs, in the bracha and Shmoneh Esrei of Shemei Tefillah. Omer Baimino Dahi, the Tayyib Ba'ash L'Ravve, to which Vacha Barman Yomi responded to Abai that, yeah, but the reason why we pass in that way is because actually the Chachamim hold that way as well. Titani is willing to brace her, but Eliezer Omer says Eliezer, Shel Adam Tzrochav Achakach Yispal. Says Eliezer, a person should first pray for the things that he wants, that he needs, and then let him daven Shmoneh Esrei. Shnemar Tefillah L'Ani Kiyatov V'Lif Neshim Yispach Sichoi Ein Sicha Ela Tefillah Shnemar V'Yitzi Yitzchak L'Tzuach Basad. That the pasuk says Tefillah L'Ani Kiyatov, that the poor man first wraps himself in supplications, his own supplications for what he needs, and then V'Lifnei Hashem Mishpach Sicho, and then afterwards he davens Shmoneh Esrei, and he says Sicha is Tefillah Shnemar V'Yitzi Yitzchak L'Tzuach Basad. Right, which is a reference to Tefillah Mincha. So Sicha is Tefillah. So first, make your request for what you need, and then Shmoneh Esrei. Yeshua, Mr. Yeshua, Fakert. Yispal v'achakach yishul tzrocham. You should first pray the Shmoneh Esrei, and then at the end, afterwards, ask for what you need. Shneimar says, Eshbech l'fon of Sichi. First, I will pray Shmoneh Esrei, Sarasi l'fon of Agid, and then I will ask for the things that I need. Rabbi Eliezer Nami Oksev Eshbech l'fon of Sichi. What does Rabbi Eliezer do with Rabbi Yeshua's pasuk? This is what it's saying. Eshbach l'fon of Sichi bizman shetzorasi l'fon of Agid. That when I've already shetzorasi l'fon of Agid, once I've already asked for the things that I need, then Eshbach l'fon of Sichi, then I'll daven Shmoneh Esrei. That is according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua Nami Oksiv Tefillah L'Ani Kiyatov. According to Rabbi Yeshua, what is it with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion of Tefillah L'Ani Kiyatov? Means that he first asks for what he needs and then davens. When do we have Tefillah Kiyatov? When does a poor person ask for his needs? That's only after he's daven Shmoneh Esrei. So look, we didn't have a definitive answer like either Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Shua. And this is pretty lamaisa stuff, right? When should we pray for the things that we need? Before Shmoneh Esrei, after Shmoneh Esrei? But Ma'akim, if you get what's the machlokas between them? Because the Darsh Reb Simlai, like Reb Simlai Darshan, the Darsh Reb Simlai, L'olam yisad ha'adam shvachai shel makom achakach yispal. A person should first be misad the praise of God, i.e. the Shmoneh Esrei, and then afterwards, Yispal, he should ask for what he needs. Minola mi Moshe Rabbeinu, like Moshe Rabbeinu, T'chsiv Hashem Eloikim, Ata Achilos L'Aretz Es Avtecha V'Gomer, Uchsiv Asu Ebeno V'Eretz Ha'aretz HaTorah. That Moshe Rabbeinu first gave Shevach to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and only afterwards did he ask for what he needs. Rabbi Yeshua Savar Yalfina mi Moshe. So Rabbi Yeshua says we learn from Moshe, just like Moshe first daven and then ask for what he needs. So therefore we do that as well. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with Rabbi Yeshua. He says, Lo yafinu mi Moshe, shiny Moshe, do have guvre. Rabbi Eliezer says, look, Moshe was a great person. Therefore, it's okay for him to first praise God and then ask for what he needs. But if anybody else did it, it would look like they're haughty. However, the Chachamim, this is the Ashli Rabbe, these are the thick ropes. These is, when we said that, Nachman Mahdi says that you could ask for whatever you want in Shemei Tefillah, and we say in that case we take a paskin like him, that's because the rabbis agree with him as well. The rabbis say that a person prays for what he needs in Shemei Tefillah, not before Shemei Esrei, not after Shemei Esrei, but in Shemei Tefillah. Says the rabbis. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Alacha Kediv Chacham. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, the Alacha is like the Chacham that you can ask for whatever you want in Shemei Tefillah. Amar Rav Yehuda Breder Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas Mishmei Derav Afal Picha Amar Shal Adam Tzachah B'Shemei Tefillah. Even though they said that a person can pray for whatever he wants for his needs in Shemei Tefillah. Aval in Bod Loimer B'Soif Kol Bracha Uvracha Mein Kol Bracha Uvracha Omer. But another option is also that for each and every bracha, you could make your own requests that are relative into the bracha. Right? In the bracha of Yerushalayim Yercha Brachim Toshuv, you could say, Hashem, I really want Mashiach now. In the pasuk, in the bracha of, Hashivenu Avinu L'Soresecha K'venu K'avitecha, you could also say, Hashem, I really want to learn more or something. Right? You could daven things that are relative to the bracha that you are saying in the Shemona Esrei. Amar B'chia Bar Ashi Amar Rav Hava Bisha Amar Shoyel Adam Tzocha B'Shemei Tefillah Im Yesh Loichola B'Soch Beiso Amar B'Echas Cholim. Even though the rabbi said that you ask for all your needs in Shemei Tefillah, however, if there's somebody sick in one's house, so then you could pray for them in the bracha for sick people. If he needs parnasa, so then he'll daven for that in the bracha of Baruch Aleinu. Says Rabbi Shua ben Levi that even though the Chacham said that you pray for whatever you need in Shemei Tefillah, however, but if you want to wait until after the Shemona Esrei is over, then you can be marich, you can go on for as long as you want, no problem. We said, right, even Kiseder Yom Kippur, even if you want it to be like as big as Yom Kippur. Maybe even if you want to do all that stuff that we do on Yom Kippur, the Al-Chaitz and stuff, I don't know. Wow, okay, well that was Daf Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.